Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Doris Polo in Quito, and this is from the South. The 31st Intersessional Meeting of the Caribbean Community began on Tuesday to address a series of regional matters. Representatives of the 15 member countries will deliberate on policies regarding security, climate change, tourism and commerce. They will also discuss the implementation of the CARICOM single market and economy and a regional approach to the coronavirus along with international issues. The meeting will end on Wednesday. CARICOM Secretary General began the session by addressing the pressing issues at hand.
The scope of our agenda illustrates the breadth of issues which we as a community must address to further consolidate our integration and to position ourselves advantageously in an increasingly complex and challenging global arena. Whether it is the imperative of making significant progress with the single market and economy, securing our financial sector, safeguarding our fiscal sovereignty, enhancing our technological capability and capacity, protecting the health and security of our people, expanding our foreign outreach, it is with one goal in mind. We have to build a resilient Caribbean community.
Lauding the success of the regional integration movement, CARICOM Chair Mayor Amor Motley urged the heads of government to act in the interest of the region and protect its sovereignty.
I hope and pray, particularly in the presence of these young people for whom we act today, but who will act for us tomorrow, that we take courage and recognize that it is in the interest of those who are not of this community to advance their own individual causes. The only people capable of defending our causes and our future and our development is us ourselves. We may not do it overnight. We may not do it in a year. We may not even do it in a decade. But if we recognize that this integration movement is one of the most successful integration movements that was established in the 20th century, we then better appreciate the responsibility that we have to care it, to nurture it, and not to allow for any kind of political or diplomatic embolism to threaten its existence. I trust and pray that we come to this moment, therefore, conscious that as family, nothing can separate us and no one shall get in between us. It is against this background that we therefore recognize that it is principles that shall guide us always. And if we are faithful to those principles, then we shall always find a way home. Principles may be inconvenient, but they guarantee our protection and our integrity.
The Prime Minister of St. Lucia, Alan Chastanet, noted that the challenges existed while he was at the helm. This includes what he called an undemocratic EU blacklisting, de-risking, and the issues within both Haiti and Venezuela. PM Chastanet went on to slam external interference in Venezuela's internal affairs.
The lack of resolution to the ongoing situation in Venezuela continues to concern us. So far, all efforts at mediation have failed. In fact, from all indications, conditions in Venezuela continue to deteriorate despite a recent lull, and this is likely to make finding a solution even harder. The involvement of outside forces in the controversy, however, could only escalate the crisis and make a resolution that more difficult, while at the same time testing and stressing our own attempt at a common position on that issue.
Canada's Foreign Minister François-Philippe Champagne has met with Barbados Prime Minister Mayor Motley and CARICOM Secretary General Erwin Larocque a day before the regional meeting. Champagne replaced Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who cancelled his trip to Bridgetown amid nationwide blockades. The demonstrations are being held by Indigenous people and allies against a planned pipeline project in the west of the country. Trudeau was expected to speak at the two-day conference to advocate for a seat on the UN Security Council. Meanwhile, Jamaica's Prime Minister Andrew Holness has explained why he skipped out on the CARICOM Heads of Government conference that is taking place in Barbados. In a statement, Holness said his absence was due to pressing national matters and to ensure the constitutional composition of the cabinet after a member resigned. A delegation led by the nation's foreign minister is, however, in attendance. Now, this comes amid concerns the Prime Minister was retaliating against CARICOM Chair Mia Mottley, who boycotted a meeting with the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo that took place in Jamaica last month. Mottley viewed the meeting as an attempt to divide the region, as all leaders weren't invited. Now, ahead of the CARICOM conference, Trinidad and Tobago's Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley signed a unitization agreement with his Barbadian counterpart. The deal will allow for the exploration of hydrocarbon resources between both countries. Dr. Rowley lamented that his nation was prevented from executing a similar agreement with Venezuela due to illegal blockades.
We have been working on a unitization with Venezuela for almost 20 years after we have discovered the Loran Manatee and other fields on our southern border. And we have been working on this for almost 20 years. And then recently, Venezuela got itself sanctioned by the United States, and that puts an end to that, because after 20 years, the Venezuelans cannot now move in the way that we were hoping from the first day we started out. So we have just got agreement with Venezuela, which is very significant for Trinidad and Tobago, saying, we agree that you can go ahead and exploit on your side, and we will do on our side. But that's a very unusual development, and it usually takes good cooperation between countries.
Meanwhile, Bahamas Prime Minister Dr. Hubert Minnis provided an update on his country's recovery following last year's devastating Hurricane Ian. He was speaking to the Bahamian diaspora on the sidelines of the CARICOM conference in Barbados.
But the country is growing, the country is developing, investment is flourishing. There'll be great, lots of job opportunities. Exuma is bursting at the seams in terms of employment, development, etc. And therefore, we're constructing a new airport in Exuma. Lutra is undergoing the same changes, and therefore we're constructing a new airport at Lutra, making the changes for not only our guests but ourselves.
Now, in other news, Venezuela has strongly condemned the United States' decision to impose sanctions on the Russian oil company Rosneft for trading in Venezuelan crude. The foreign minister Jorge Arias tweeted that these latest sanctions were an attack on Venezuela's oil industry, its workers and the economy. He said the government would add them to the case against the United States, which it has taken to the International Criminal Court in The Hague. The U.S. Special Envoy for Venezuela, Elliot Abrams, announced the move against Rosneft in Washington. He said they would cut off a lifeline for the Venezuelan government, and he expected oil companies around the world to stop doing business with Rosneft. Telesur has embarked on a series that looks back on the Venezuelan opposition's attempts to enter supposed humanitarian aid into the country. Let's take a look at the first of several reports that delve into U.S.-backed efforts to overthrow the government.
The date was January 5th, 2019. The legislative year has just begun in Venezuela, and expectations were high among lawmakers.
In peace, in a healthy peace, all in peace.
But peace wasn't necessarily what they wanted for Venezuela.
We urge Nicolás Maduro to not take office as president and respect the Assembly's role and transfer provisional power to this body until new elections take place.
The Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela is perplexed by these extravagant declarations by a group of countries of the American continent. After receiving orders from the U.S. government through a video conference, they have decided to support a coup in Venezuela.
And that was the first part of Washington's aggression. Juan Guaido was chosen by the White House to be the poster child of their plan once he became the president of the National Assembly.
After the legislative session, we formally speak to the media.
We have to call Juan Guaido a U.S. marketing phenomenon. He was created. They considered all his aspects, like his youth or the color of his skin.
The marketing phenomenon started with the script of his speech when taking his oath as President of the National Assembly. That speech set the agenda, the narrative, and the actions that followed.
We reaffirm the illegitimacy of Nicolas Maduro Moros for not carrying out an election on May 20.
These facts lead us back to 2018. This sector of the opposition, now led by Juan Guaido, does not recognize Nicolas Maduro and speaks of stealing the presidency. Ironically, they demanded, through violent actions known as guarimbas, to move forward with the elections in 2017.
We want an open review of the election schedule in Venezuela and to move forward with the presidential elections.
But this radical sector of the opposition did not participate in the presidential election and called for a boycott.
We won't participate in this electoral fraud, and we will leave them alone with this election. We will leave the street desolated.
But another group from the opposition, cast aside by their own people, did participate in the presidential elections by signing an agreement to set up a dialogue, while 4 political parties from the opposition rejected it.
But the essential is there, an agreement on the electoral dates, electoral guarantees, and the electoral observation missions.
Part of the opposition is now participating in a dialogue, distancing themselves from violent strategies and calls for a military invasion. They say their main mistakes were calling for an abstention, refusing to accept that presidential elections did take place, and declaring that there is no legitimate president.
For me, it was never explained what really happened on May 20, 2018. They took it on Maduro, and that's the biggest contradictions. The worst part is that the international community supported it.
On January 10, 2019, with the recognition of more than 90 countries, Nicolas Maduro took office as president for a second term.
I will fulfill all the mandate of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
The sun in Venezuela rises from the Essequibo, always loyal, never becoming traitors.
At the same time, the attacks of the United States turned towards the military in an attempt to break up their unity and loyalty.
Soldier of our homeland Venezuela, I'm giving you an order.
The media, the accomplices, showed this as a sign of power.
The U.S. government was fooled. It was manipulated by the offers of those who want to take power by force. By going against the Constitution, they claimed the military was on their side, which was a lie.
The opposition created an amnesty law to try convincing the military to support the coup, but they weren't successful. On our next report, we will recall the story of the false humanitarian aid at the Colombian border.
Madeline Garcia, Telesur, Caracas, Venezuela.
We'll take a short break now, and when we come back, we'll look at Bolivia ahead of the May 3rd elections that don't seem to be shaping up as either free or fair. Join us again in a... Welcome back. Bolivia's movement towards socialism, the party of Evo Morales, has declared itself in emergency over the treatment of its candidates for the May elections. The Supreme Electoral Court said it had not yet approved the candidacies of Evo Morales for the Senate and 10 other masked candidates because they are being challenged by parties of the right. The MAS says this is a political move and violates electoral rules. Our correspondent in La Paz, Freddy Morales, has the details.
Almost 40% of the candidates nominated for different posts in the elections on May the 3rd have been excluded from the race. according to the Supreme Electoral Court. The numbers are as follows. 2,107 candidates were put forward. Of these, 1,278 have been approved. That means 797 are out. There is also a list of 13 candidates whose nominations are still subject to challenges and about whom the Electoral Court says it will make an announcement as soon as possible. Among these is the candidate for senator from the Department of Cochabamba, Evo Morales, who has become the main target of the right, which organized the coup last November. They are filing several demands to have him ruled ineligible. The hierarchy of the Catholic Church, the 7 presidential candidates of the right, the civic committees of Santa Cruz and La Paz, and other sectors that supported the coup are all demanding that Evo Morales be excluded. Either they argue that he doesn't meet the residency requirement because he had to seek refuge abroad after the coup, or they simply demand he be ruled out without presenting any particular reason. So Evo Morales and the other 12 remain in suspense, and the Electoral Court has until this Friday to publish the new list of candidates and thus resolve their situation one way or the other. It's worth pointing out that of these 13 still in suspense, 11 are from Evo Morales' movement towards socialism, including the mass presidential candidate Luis Arce and the former foreign minister Diego Pare.
Our correspondent Freddy Morales in La Paz. The European Union has put Panama back on its blacklist of tax havens after deciding the country had not done enough to meet global transparency standards. Panama, along with the Cayman Islands, Seychelles, and Palau, was added to the list of 8 other territories already deemed to be non-cooperative jurisdictions for tax purposes. Panama was previously removed from the list in 2018 and placed on a halfway gray list under close scrutiny after the EU accepted its promises to comply with rules on sharing tax information in the wake of the 2016 Panama Papers scandal. However, the EU has now decided that Panama did not implement the tax reforms to which it had committed by the agreed deadline.
If you ask the average European citizen...
Moving on, political parties in the Dominican Republic are rejecting the announcement by electoral authorities to hold a do-over for the municipal elections on March 15th after suspending them on Sunday. Our correspondent Daisy Toussaint has more.
Following the suspension of the municipal elections on Sunday, there is now a political crisis. There is tension in the country, with constant protests rejecting the decision. 2 people were killed and 11 were injured during these protests. President Danilo Medina spoke to Dominicans and said that he regretted the circumstances which led to the decision to suspend the elections, which left millions of citizens without the opportunity to vote. He called on political parties to remain calm and be responsible. Meanwhile, the Electoral Observatory, with members of several countries in Latin America, said it was concerned about the crisis. It said that the failure of the automated voting system generates numerous doubts. Several organizations have held vigils in the country and abroad against the situation. Now opposition parties say that they weren't consulted on the new date for the elections to be held on March 15th and under the manual voting system.
We'll be taking one last break, after which we look at Uganda and Rwanda possibly re-engaging in ties. Stay with us to find out. Welcome back. The World Health Organization has announced that there have been 110 new coronavirus cases outside China in the past 24 hours, but warned against a global overreaction to the outbreak following panic buying, event cancellations, and concerns about cruise ship travel. China's official death toll has risen to nearly 1,900. The outbreak is threatening to put a dent in the global economy, with China paralyzed by vast quarantine measures and major firms such as iPhone maker Apple and mining giant BHP warning it could impact their earnings. So far, more than 72,000 people have been infected in China and hundreds more abroad. The WHO has stressed that the disease has only infected a tiny proportion of people outside its epicenter and the mortality rate remains relatively low. Liu Jiming, director of the Wuchang Hospital in Wuhan, the epicenter of the COVID-19 outbreak, died on Tuesday morning after all efforts to save his life failed, according to Chinese state media. Tributes have been paid to the director, who worked tirelessly to contain the spread of the virus. Meanwhile, Russia has announced it will temporarily suspend the entry of Chinese citizens to its territory starting from February 20th as part of the country's measures to prevent the spread of the novel coronavirus. The suspension will be for Chinese citizens entering Russia for employment, private, educational, and tourist purposes. Moving to Africa, Uganda has released 13 detained Rwandan nationals as the two nations re-engage to mend broken relations. The freed Rwandan citizens were facing espionage and security-related charges, but Uganda released them as a sign of commitment to an ongoing process of finding a lasting solution to the conflict between the two countries. Relations between Rwanda and Uganda deteriorated last year when the two sides accused each other of killings and espionage.
And most importantly, it is Uganda's expectation that Rwanda too will reciprocate the goodwill gesture by addressing the concerns that Uganda has raised, including people being detained and including still incarcerated in Rwanda, within the Rwanda framework, which requires immediate action.
In South Asia, Afghanistan's election commission says Ashraf Ghani has won a second term as president with 50.64% of the votes. The results were issued nearly 5 months after the polls took place. In second place was businessman Abdullah, who received 39.52% of the ballots cast, and former senior Taliban official Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who ranked third with 3.85% of the votes. Abdullah and Hekmatyar previously said they would not accept the results due to the illegal behavior by the Electoral Commission.
The Election Commission, in accordance to Article 61 of the Constitution, declares Mr. Ashraf Ghani, who has won 923,592 votes, equal to 50.64% of the votes, as the elected president of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan.
South Africa's Minister of Presidential Affairs, Jackson Mthembu, has described the disruption of Cyril Ramaphosa's State of the Nation address last week as disrespectful. Mthembu said the conduct of the economic freedom fighters in Parliament demonstrated their disdain for the body and the citizenry. Last Thursday, EFF MPs forced Ramaphosa to momentarily abandon his address in protest against the presence of apartheid-era President Frederick de Klerk, who they say is an unrepentant apartheid murderer.
In his characterization of the EFF's behavior in this House as anti-democratic, totally unacceptable, and actually reprehensible. The EFF's behavior is uncouth, disrespectful, and demonstrates the disdain they have for this august House and the people of South Africa. I wonder why they get voted into this House.
But the leader of the EFF, Julius Malema, has rebuffed the minister's accusation, saying there was nothing wrong with his members' behavior. He's also accused African National Congress leaders of not confronting de Klerk because they fear he will expose some as spies who worked for the apartheid government.
There is absolutely nothing that de Klerk does in terms of nation building. Many of you are scared to confront this question because de Klerk has got your false numbers. You were spies and you are scared that when you take de Klerk head on, your file of being spies will be released and you will be exposed for who you are, that you are not actually revolutionaries, you are impimpies who are on the payroll of de Klerk and the apartheid regime.
Spanish farmers in yellow vests have blocked highways with about 700 tractors in the southwestern part of the country in the latest mass protest over what they say are plummeting incomes for agricultural workers. Several labor unions called for rallies predominantly in the Extremadura and Andalusia regions to demand government action to ensure more realistic retail prices for fruits and vegetables. Protests against high production costs and low prices for farm produce are posing an almost daily challenge to Spain's month-old coalition government as the European Union plans to cut agricultural subsidies and the United States threatens to impose tariffs. Well, we will be paying attention to these stories and more. And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Doris Polo. Thank you for watching.